Hey guys, it's that time again where I walk you through pretty much like the meta and what's strong, like what classes are strong and what classes are weak in PvP. I think that I have a pretty solid understanding of the classes that are doing pretty well. I've been playing more at that 24-2500 MMR range, which is like that high gladiator near rank 1 range. And I think that I'm in a position where I feel that I have a pretty solid understanding of where all the classes are in terms of strength. And also why some classes aren't performing so well. And I think that this video in particular is going to be different from my previous meta snapshots because I want to walk through every one of the classes. I don't want to leave a class behind, and that's why I've written them down in more of a formatted list. I'm going to be walking you through each class as opposed to just talking about it for 12 minutes or something, right? So we're going to go ahead and just dive into it. The first class on the radar is going to be the Warrior class. In particular, Arms and Fury is what I'm going to talk about. Arms Warrior is kind of in the middle ground of melee because all melees are doing pretty well right now. They all pretty much do like the same amount of DPS, but Arms Warrior bring a pretty solid amount of mobility with double time and heroic leap. And they also are able to put out a lot of pressure since they have Mortal Strike. They can sometimes sweeping strikes Mortal Strike and get Mortal Strike on 2 people, including the Sharpened Blade, Blade Storm, stuff like that. It does pretty well against like cleaves because they are so durable. They do have that defensive stance. They have Die by the Sword, and that stuff is really made for fighting against other melee classes. And I think that, in particular, Arms Warrior are in a pretty good spot right now. I see them really playing a lot of like TSG cleave type comps, so like Unholy Death Knight and Arms Warrior, paired with like a Restoration Shaman or something like that, or a Holy Priest even. And then I see a lot of like WLS. So WLS was really strong last season. That is Warrior, Affliction Warlock, or whatever Warlock, and Restoration Shaman. And I see a lot of comps that are really focused on just doing damage and pressure as opposed to a bursty comp like WMD. Like I haven't seen any WMDs or anything like that, but because I've seen a lot of like Warrior, Fire Mage, Paladin throughout the expansion, and I don't see a whole lot of that right now, and I don't see them doing so well. So more so just sticking to the pressure and cleave comps. My notes for Fury Warrior, I really tried hard to think about a spot where Fury Warrior would fit in, but the only note I could think of is the fact that they just die. So that's it. They're just dead. They're just dead people. Sorry, Fury Warriors. But Rep Paladins in particular, I'm moving on to the Paladin, right? So I want to talk about Rep Paladin because I think that it's really interesting right now. They're seeing a lot more play. They really, really are. In particular, Rep Paladins throughout the whole livelihood of Rep Paladins throughout the whole game, the many, many years that the game has been out, Rep Paladins have been known as like the wheelchair class where they just don't ever do well because they don't have a whole lot of survivability. But I've seen Rep Paladins really thrive in this meta because they have the Blessing of Sanctuary. Yeah, there we go. Sanctuary, and they do a lot of AoE damage whenever they're in melee range of multiple targets. Stuff like Divine Storm and just kind of like doing overall crazy AoE damage. I've seen Rep Paladins outperform pretty much every class in terms of damage whenever they're fighting against cleaves. Where two melee have to be in like a close proximity of each other to kill people. And I think that Rep Paladin kind of see a pretty solid spot in this meta. I mean, I was even watching Vanguards in the WoW Regionals play Rep Paladin Arms Warrior as a comp, and I think that they are being introduced to more comps, but they do have poor survivability. They only have their auto bubble, and then they have their Blessing of Protection. So that's really it in terms of like survivability. So there's just not a whole lot that they can do to survive against stuff like RMP. But they do have their strengths, and I think that is coming up more so now, and they're not so wheelchair class. But moving on from that, we're going to talk about rogues. Rogues are in a really interesting spot right now. In particular, I want to talk about the Assassination Rogue first. I think the Assassination Rogue is, again, one of those like middle ground classes where they can do well, but rogues, I think, are like one of the more like less durable than the more fragile classes of the melee. And an Assassination Rogue fitting into this specific meta where melee cleaves are so common, I don't think Assassination Rogue really fits in a whole lot right now. But they have really great cleave damage. They have a lot of like Fan Knives dotting up both targets and getting out a lot of bleeds and stuff like that really works out. And I think that can be strong if of like Affliction Warlocks and Restoration Shamans were strong. And I think that they are pretty limited in the classes they can play because they really only stick to specifically those those like situations where they're playing with like an athlete warlock or a shadow priest or even maybe a moonkin. But I am seeing a ton of subtlety rogues. I think subtlety rogues are the strongest of the three because they can pretty much stun anyone at any time, and they can do a big amount of burst damage to that stun target. Whenever they have Shadow Blades up for 30 seconds, they're able to basically Shadow Dance one target, get it low. They use a defensive cooldown. They then will use a cheap shot or 3 cheap shots onto another target. And while that first target is recovering, that second target has to use defensive cooldowns. And you see a lot of that kind of playstyle through stuff like RMP. You see a lot of that through Thug Cleave, which is Hunter and Rogue. And I think that sub-rogues overall, since they have huge mobility, they can survive pretty decently well. And they have a tremendous amount of burst damage on, whenever they want. That pretty much makes it for a very strong play style whenever they're playing well, right? And the team is on the same page. Outlaw Rogues is that's the least played spec of the three because it's just so much RNG with the Roll the Bones. They provide really good consistent pressure if you are lucky, but if your Roll the Bones isn't lucky, then you're not going to get a whole lot out of that. I want to talk about priests now because priests are in particular doing very well. They're probably the strongest caster right now because they just, for some reason, do a lot of damage. Like if you don't allow, if you allow a shadow priest to cast, they're going to do a ton of damage to your team. It's really, really strong right now. And in 7.3, they are definitely doing a whole lot more than in previous patches. And I think because melee, like a lot of melee classes got like a flat damage nerf recently. It wasn't a whole lot, but I think that flat damage nerf allowed for Shadow Priest to survive a little bit more. And Shadow Priests are pairing up with like Demon Hunters, Feral Druids, is pretty much anyone, and like really making it work. And I think that in particular is something to note because Shadow Priest has been dying a lot and now they're not, and they're doing really well. So good for them, right? Moving on to the Shaman class. Enhancement in particular, it's interesting because Enhancement was so strong in the beginning of the expansion playing Turbo Cleave, and a lot of the Rank 1 players play Enhancement Shaman every now and then just to like play like Enhancement Shaman Windwalker for fun or whatever, and their whole comp is based around like huge bursts with Bloodlust and Storm Strike procs and stuff like that. But you really don't need Purge, and that's like the main reason why you would take an Enhancement Shaman in a competitive situation is because you would get that Purge spam out of Enhancement Shaman, which is really valuable. That's actually like why Enhancement Shaman won BlizzCon last year, and the Warlords of Draenor Turbo Cleave, not last year but the year before that, and the Warlords of Draenor Turbo Cleave, like craziness, that actually was because of Purge. And since Holy Priests, Disc Priests, and Resto Shamans are all strong right now, that's probably like the strongest healers. The Purge in particular is not so valued from the Enhancement Shaman, and since the Enhancement Shaman doesn't have stuns like say a Windwalker Monk or a Demon Hunter or a Rogue does, it's just not as valuable of a class. Elemental Shaman, they're great AoE pressure, but kind of inconsistent, and they die really, really fast to Cleaves. So there's really not a whole lot to say there. I think that if Cleaves get slower, if they do less damage, then maybe Elemental Shaman will come out and maybe pair with like a Warlock and get back to that LSD playstyle that we've seen so frequently throughout expansions. But I don't think that they're in a position to really be super strong right now. Now, here's the next class, and this is going to be the Mage. This is the one I'm most knowledgeable about because I play Mage, I play against Mages, I know exactly like what people are doing and what people are trying when they're playing Mage, and I feel like I have a pretty solid understanding. This thought process and this opinion really hasn't changed a whole lot. I've given my opinion on this before, and I think it's pretty much the same, but Frost Mage in particular is the most played spec right now for Mage. They offer really good bursts with their Frozen Orb Banes combos and their Comet Storm Icy Nova and their Ebb and Bolt combos. But I think that they're lacking mobility in a very mobile game whenever you're playing against a lot of Windwalker Monks and Demon Hunters and Arms Warriors with double time. And I think that in particular, and even Feral Druids, like that reason itself is why Frost Mages aren't doing so well in the meta right now, outside of RMP. Like when Frost Mages fight like Cleaves, it's really hard for the Mage to survive because they just can't outperform these Cleaves. But if RMP, say, plays against like a Shadow Priest team or something like that, they're going to do really well. I just don't see a whole lot of Frost Mages doing so well because they fight against a lot of Cleaves, and I don't think the Frost Mage kit I think that it does okay and can win, but I think if a cleave like is playing well, then I don't think that the Frost Mage team should win, and that's how I feel. The Fire Mage in particular has fallen off a lot lately. I think because melee are just so strong right now, and Holy Paladins have kind of taken the back seat. They're just not as strong of a class due to their melee wings being nerfed and all that stuff. I think that Fire Mage in particular suffers from that, because if their healer and their team comps aren't doing so great, and the melee cleaves are very strong, then Fire Mage kind of runs into the same problem that Frost Mage does, and like not being able to keep up with these teams that can just catch them and kill them, right? And their healers not being able to like keep up with the Fire Mage needs is kind of why they're falling behind, I would say. And Arcane Mage is still my favorite spec of the three. I think that they're really, really mobile. They have a lot of skill cap available. I think that Arcane Mage really struggles against rogues and Windwalker monks to an extent. I think that like subtlety rogues, you can't really outplay a subtlety rogue because they just shadow step stun you. But like with a Windwalker monk or a Death Knight where you can shimmer their death grip, or a warrior where you can kite all of their mobility, demon hunter which you can kind of outplay, and a Windwalker monk you can kind of outplay. Like those classes have possibilities for Arcane Mages to win, and that's why I think if people played Arcane and just like learned it really well and become like masters of Arcane Mage, I think that they would see a lot of success in that. So that's just my opinion, I guess. I think that that's kind of an unpopular opinion too, but I definitely enjoy watching other Arcane Mages play and seeing like how they decide that they want to fight against an enemy team. That's really good. But enough about Mage. Let's talk about Warlock. Affliction Warlock has been doing all right. They just kind of they do all right in this meta. It's just that melee cleaves kind of run over Affliction Warlocks, and Affliction Warlocks have received some nerfs in the recent couple months, so they're not doing as well as they used to when WLS reigned supreme over every other comp in the game. But Destruction Warlocks have been doing very well. They have a really solid like presence within a game, so whenever they enter an arena, like everyone wants to interrupt the Chaos Bolt. So if you played something like Destruction Warlock and Shadow Priest, where you have to interrupt both targets a lot in order to stop their damage, eventually some cast will slip through the cracks, right? And that's the problem, is that if you don't interrupt the Shadow Priest, then he will do a ton of damage. And if you don't interrupt the Destruction Warlock, then the Destruction Warlock will do a ton of damage, right? So it's just kind of a trade-off. I think that Destruction Warlocks do have a little small piece of the meta that they can be very good at, and I think that that's starting to shine now as these Shadow Priest Destruction Warlock teams come out, and I think that Destruction Warlock also can fit into some other comps. Demonology Warlock is seeing some play, but they get run over by cleaves a lot because they have to cast a lot in order to get like their damage out, their Thalkiels, their demons, and all that stuff, and empower them. So outside of like the Fellord combo, the Fellord stun combo that they have, I really don't see Demonology Warlocks having a whole lot to work with. I just think that they're not as strong as Destruction Warlocks, and I think that they're just in a weird place in the meta where like they could be strong, but they're just, not a whole lot of people put their time into it. But I do want to talk about monks, because monks are so popular in this meta. They're currently one of the strongest melee classes in the game. Their Serenity, their overall damage that they are able to put out is just so large. They can really kill any target, and they can kill any target with their cooldowns up. They don't have to wait too long for their cooldowns to be up, and they have great mobility, and they have a ton of stuns in order to peel for their team if they need to. They also have this Flying Serpent Kick talent where they can like Flying Serpent Kick across the map, and then also allow their team to have like Blessing of Freedom and run at a really fast rate, and that's super valuable for like a healer that's being trained. And I think that it's really a strong class right now, and you're seeing a lot of Windwalker monks being played, mostly because of the damage that they put out, but there's also other reasons in a lot of situations in high ratings. I want to talk about Druids. Druids are extremely controversial right now because Feral Druids just got a huge rework in 7.3. They're doing very well, but they actually got nerfed a whole lot. I think that Feral Druids got overbuffed because of the damage changes, and probably the devs didn't know how to really like tune for a class design that wasn't released yet. And that resulted in them being kind of overbuffed, but I think that over time they're going to get a little bit more damage nerfs. They already got one big damage nerf, and that reduced a ton of damage for them. But I think that they're going to get another one pretty soon, and I think after that, people will realize that Feral Druids are kind of weak. Like they still lack survivability. They're much like red paladins, where like you can just kill them, right? And I think that if you have to sit in bear form as a feral druid, you're not going to be as valuable as, say, an unholy death knight, who can always be pressured and or always continue doing pressure and also use their defensive cooldowns and like kind of have best of both worlds, right? So I think that feral druid sitting in bear form is going to be really bad for a team. Balanced druid is interesting because they received some really huge armor nerfs last season, and they're still being played pretty often because they do a lot of damage, especially during incarnation, on their 3-minute cooldown for a 30-second duration. They have a really great burst and control dynamic to the class, but I think that the only reason why people play Moonkin in like a competitive environment is because that they're a tankier mage. They're able to survive better than a mage a lot of the time, especially against cleaves. That, and I think that is really like the extent of it, because mages have spam polymorph, druids have spam cyclone, mages have a 3-minute cooldown, or however many cooldown, like whether that's veins or arcane power. They have really good burst is what I'm trying to say, and then they Moonkins have incarnation. So I think that they're very similar in the two classes, but I think that Moonkin just brings a little bit of a tankier side of it, and I think that that's why it's so valuable right now. I think that mages kind of just always die unless they outplay somehow, and Moonkins can sometimes not die just because they can be in bear form and frenzied regen. They can do a lot of things to survive. So that's just my thoughts on that. The Havoc Demon Hunter is something that I've been playing a whole lot recently. I've really enjoyed this class, and I think honestly this is probably the strongest melee class right now. They have huge burst, like insane burst, probably the biggest burst of any class outside of like Red Paladins and Wings on 2 targets. And I think that Havoc Demon Hunters, they have really great mobility and disruption, having a 15-second range to interrupt, having a 30-second imprison. They've got their Chaos Nova. They've got a lot of different things to really like disrupt the enemy team, and it's all AoE. So say you have a 2 or 3 person Chaos Nova, like that's super valuable to have. And I think that playing Havoc Demon Hunter in pretty much every comp right now works really well, because they just cleave so well, they do so much damage, and they offer a lot. And I think that one big point that people aren't talking about is the fact that Havoc Demon Hunters have Darkness, and Darkness is basically an AoE immunity for your entire team for 8 seconds. I mean, it's super valuable of an ability, and you're seeing it a lot. That's why Double Demon Hunter is working so well right now, is because not only do they have a lot of damage, but also like having that darkness to be able to save you, your teammate, or your healer, like that's super valuable, and people aren't really like talking about that a whole lot. And I think darkness is just an incredibly strong cooldown right now, and I'm seeing a lot of like that being used well in arena, which it hadn't really been used very well before. So I think like Demon Hunter would be, in my opinion, the strongest melee class right now. I think that they fit in like the most amount of comps. They do a really great job at what they do, and that's just why I would rank them at number 1. And last but not least, we have the Death Knight. The Death Knight is definitely going to be an insane class because they're very durable, and in a world where you have to be durable to survive these consistent damage cleaves, I don't think the Frost Death Knight is kind of up there with Unholy right now, because I think that Frost Death Knight, like, they are seeing more play because they got some damage buffs, but like they're still pretty one-dimensional and they die pretty quickly. I think that Death Knight, or Frost Death Knight in particular, was the strongest in Season 1 because Chill Streak was so strong, but it's really kind of entirely dependent on how strong the class is damage-wise, and that's the extent of it. Whereas in Holy Death Knight, they have really great consistent pressure, they're extremely hard to kill, they've got like 4 defensive cooldowns, and I think that Unholy Death Knight will probably be one of the most played, if not the most, or at least like one of the top classes you'll see of this season, and also maybe even BlizzCon. I think they'll have a huge presence at BlizzCon, just because of how consistent and how durable they are. So I want to talk a little bit about healers, and we're going to start this off with Restoration Shaman because I talked a lot about it last time. They're still doing super well. They're really tanky and disruptive and well-rounded, and they offer Urshield, which is really big for comps like RMP and pretty much any comp that focuses on single target damage. I think that Restoration Shaman really does well against those those situations where they do like they kind of like stop classes that are meant for burst, and since that's strong, those like single target burst comps aren't as strong. Restoration Druid isn't played too often because their healing is just lower than it used to be, but they're still viable and they still do really well sometimes. It's just a matter of like the fact that they don't have a whole lot of overall healing output makes it kind of difficult, right? And that's like whenever it gets into deep dampening games, it doesn't work so well. But they definitely still work. Clone is still very, very powerful, and I think that it could be good. I just don't know if people play it a whole lot. And I don't think there's a whole lot of Restoration Druids in general. Mistweaver Monk is the weakest healer, in my opinion, right now, because they actually are countered by Windwalker Monks, which are super relevant right now. So if Windwalker Monks get nerfed, then I think Mistweavers could be better. I just think that if Mistweavers don't play Wave of the Crane and they fight a cleave that has stuns and cooldowns, basically you're going to have to trinket and then you die after that. So if you use your PvP trinket, you're dead on the next go. So Discipline Priests are the underdog of the healers. I think that this class really does have a lot of potential, and I just don't think that they're played a whole lot right now because everyone's like all amazed over Holy Priest, which is my next class. But I think that Discipline Priest can offer a lot of extra damage for your team. Same with Restoration Shaman, being able to electrocute spam Purge, and I think that Discipline Priests kind of offer the same thing, except for Discipline Priests, offer a little bit extra CC. They're a little bit more, I guess they have a little bit more finesse in terms of where they fit into their comp, and it kind of just depends like what comp you're playing in order to say if you want a Discipline Priest or Restoration Shaman for that specific instance or that specific queue session or whatever. Holy Priests are probably the top healer in this meta, the most played one at least, is because they're so enduring to like dampening comps and high pressure comps, and I think that they really do help survive. It's just that they die really quickly to cleaves, but in a world where maybe cleaves are starting to die down because all melee did get nerfed recently, I think that Holy Priest will start to rise again, but I still think that they're extremely strong because of their cooldowns and the way that the class works in terms of just healing output and very mana efficient. They just survive really well on dampening. Holy Paladins, I think that are one of the weakest healers, but they offer really great offensive pressure because they can keep their team moving forward with their Hammer of Justice, their Blessing of Sacrifice, their Blessing of Protection. It's just that they fall behind so fast in mana, and their healing output really isn't that good. Like if you interrupt a Holy Paladin, they fall behind really quickly. And I think that pretty much sums it up, guys, for my overall like meta analysis and talking about every single class. I hope that this did you justice. I know that the last video was shorter and probably easier to listen to because I just talked about whatever. I think that the meta right now and PvP in general is really focused on what is the tanky classes and what does the most damage. It's not really so much focused on CC. It's more focused on specifically like just whatever is tanky and just does a lot of damage, which is kind of the story of Legion. But I hope you guys enjoyed this style of video. If you enjoyed the more like structured format where I talk about every class and I don't leave anyone out, let me know down in the comments. But be sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you enjoy this video, and I'll keep you guys up to date with what's strong and what's not. So thanks guys for watching. See you all tomorrow.